everyone, or good afternoon or good evening, depending where you are on the planet. Can everyone hear me okay? Hopefully, my mic's working good and you can hear me. And yeah, so we're just going to get started here right away. Awesome. Thank you, Craig. Thanks for confirming. So today we're going to be talking about scopes and closures. And a lot of the talk is actually really focused mostly on scopes. I get into what closures are and why they're important in terms of scopes, but this is really mostly a scope talk. Um, so let me just roll in right away and get going. So, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to start off by just talking about what scopes really are in Adobe ColdFusion, when and why to use the different scopes, and a tour of them. And then we're going to jump like right into like why closures or what closures are and what they are specifically inside of ColdFusion, why it matters, and where they intersect. And then we're just going to hit a couple of mistakes and safe patterns. By the way, the majority of this talk um, is just a presentation here. However, I will be showing you a set of code. There's a little playground that I built for scopes and closures that you'll be able to go and download and install on your local system to play with it later. And I'll show you that a little bit at the end as well. All right. So why does this actually matter, by the way? Like, who cares? Right? Um, as a lot of you might know, Cold Fusion was kind of famous back in the day for having what was called implicit scope search, right? So, and we'll get into what scopes really are, but there used to be a time when you could just write a variable name and Cold Fusion would traverse across the scopes looking for the existence of that variable. And it was cool. It was actually a pretty cool reason to use Cold Fusion. However, we did discover that there were massive safety concerns about this. A number of different security things came across the wire, and we ended up removing that capability a while back. Actually, it's been over a year. Might even be 2 years. Like we put in a fix for that. Now, it is still possible to use an argument inside of your administrator to turn implicit search traversal back on, but it's not recommended. Like, seriously, it's a very, very serious security concern. Like, do not do that. That's why I'm doing this talk, to help you understand what scopes are, how to use them, yada, yada, right? So, on top of that, though, scoping your variables is just a good idea. It's just good code. Like, unscoped variables can end up in places where you don't intend them to be. They can create these huge shared state bugs. I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine actually, this was not only a scope issue, this was also an application naming issue. But there was a point at which they were creating dozens of different applications, and they were having all these problems because their application scoped variables were seemingly rewriting themselves at random. Well, you could guess why. If they didn't actually explicitly name their applications, then the application state variable would apply to all applications. Therefore, they were all in this like weird shared state between all of them. They were getting rewritten. Yeah. Now this was a long time ago. This was something early in their career that they found, but that's just an example of what can happen if you're not careful about scoping things explicitly. Um, Closures are also important because they can keep variables alive longer than expected. Not to mention, they can have unintended results in things like loops. When you're looking for variables and not scoping them correctly inside of a closure, they can potentially use a different variable than you intended, right? So, and it's just, it's hard to read also when things aren't scoped. Like, what is this variable? What does name actually mean? Like, is it coming from a URL? Is it coming from variables? Is it an argument that was fed in? So anyway, all right. So what the heck is a scope besides a mouthwash? So a scope is a named context. Okay. It's like a kind of like a bucket, and it determines where your data lives, how long it lives for, and who is able to access it, right? So it's visibility, lifetime, and ownership. And it's really important. And when we talk about that, some of these things are explicitly settable, right? And I'll get into that a little bit in a little bit. But like for example, you can set session variables. By the way, you can like turn session variables off completely. Like they can not exist inside of an application, but you can turn them on and you can give them a time to live, right? So that makes it so that anything that's put into that particular bucket will only have a time to live of that particular time span that you've put in it. Uh, in other cases, things like application variables live for the life of the application. When the application is restarted, i.e., like the server restarts, you actually like do an application stop, then all of that bucket gets destroyed, right? So anyway, we'll get into a little bit of detail on which things work when, and that's actually the next question is like, okay, like how do you choose the right scope? There's a lot of them. It's a ridiculous amount. There's more than it's more than you probably know. A lot of us use the same scopes over and over, and we pretty much just kind of like use this narrow scope. But there's a ton of them, and the right answer to that is you want to start with the smallest, least accessible scope that fits the actual job you're trying to do, right? It's this idea, it's a security idea of least necessary access, right? Like you could, I guess, use something like a server scope or some like mass scope for everything, and everything would go horribly wrong because people have access to it from other applications, and it would just like break horribly, right? So you want to like narrow that down. Now, on the same sort of note, you could try to use, say, a request scope, and then realize, well, that scope gets destroyed once the request is done. So you'd have to rebuild it every single time. That's expensive, right? So it's something you need to like have architectural thoughts about. And you need to expand out when you need more sharing or longer lifetime, access things become important. And you want to always explicitly scope now. And I'm sure you're saying, well, wait, Mark, you just said that you always have to explicitly scope. We have no choice. Well, there's an asterisk there. Inside of closures, you actually don't like they. There's no need internally inside of a closure to actually scope those variables. They're treated just implicitly as local. However, you should still do it, and I'll show you an anti-pattern later that shows why that can break. So you really, really want to prefer them. And anytime that you're using shared scopes, so anything that flies up above things like the user scopes, um, local arguments, things that are kind of in the wild. So that includes things like session, application, server. Anytime you're using those, treat them as a mutable state that's shared, right? You always have to keep in mind that there's a very, very large possibility that this could be seen or used by someone else. Why does that matter? Well, a lot of reasons, like security, first of all, but also race conditions, right? If you're using a shared mutable scope and you're using that to write something, there's a potential that between the time you write to that variable and that variable writes to, say, your database, someone else may have mutated it. And I've seen that issue actually come up occasionally in shared high level scopes. And then if a variable is temporary, just keep it local. Just use it and throw it away. Right. That's that way. There's no memory leakage. It's more performant. Right. It keeps security down to the lowest necessary access. All right. So Here's all the scopes, and later on, by the way, I'll give you a little cheat sheet on what all of these are. And like I said, there's a lot of them. We've got arguments, we've got local, and there's also the legacy var declaratives inside of functions. There's component and objects, so variables and this. Now, the one that probably most of us use, and the one that most people are most familiar with, are the request and incoming data scopes. These are things that we use a lot because, let's face it, a lot of applications are they're forms, right? They're URLs, they're query, right? And by the way, query is like a pseudoscope. Query is a weird one. We should get into that in a little bit. But then there's also things like CGI. So CGI is a really interesting one. CGI is a read only scope that is provided by the server, right? So it can share a variety of things with you, but you can't write to it, right? And then the cookie scope, which has its security implications as well. And then you've got your user app like server shared states, right? So session, application, server, and then client is a really interesting and kind of oddball one that I had completely and utterly forgot that it even existed. So yeah, let's get into it. So let's talk about the function scopes. So what are the function scopes? So there's arguments, and arguments are incoming parameters for a function call. You might be familiar with the argument scope for when you're doing like a SQL call, right? Like you're passing in arguments, you're making sure to lock those down, right? Make sure that you're like not allowing just explicit usage of those arguments, right? So you do that for functions, and functions can actually use those as well. There's also local, right? So local arguments live inside of the function, and they live for the life of the function, right? Which is usually just as it executes. And every function call gets its own arguments and local. So if you are calling something again and again and again, you're actually resetting basically the scope lifetime of those internal variables, right? So it's good. It's a good thing. It means that you're not setting something out to live for a really long time and not get used. And this is the safest place for doing things like calculations, intermediate values that are then going to get passed into something else. And most variables and most functions should live here if you can manage that, right? And here's just a little function to calculate something, right? A couple local things, and this is really easy, just adding a couple functions. So this is kind of what your stuff should look like. And why, like I mentioned before, like you don't really need the local. You could just set a var, right? And that's kind of the equivalent. Well, the reason is that it's a good habit to get into to explicitly scope all of your stuff. Otherwise, you're going to forget to do it somewhere else. And yeah, it's going to be a problem. Also, there is a performance benefit. When you explicitly scope things, it's actually faster. Because basically it doesn't the engine doesn't have to go and figure out where that variable lives in any of the scopes that it's still allowed to traverse, like inside of a closure or whatever. It knows it's local to that function, and just works. And so, as I was saying, so like there's a legacy var, and then there's the modern local. And straight up, I actually use both. I'll just be honest. I use both of these. There's not really necessarily a big differential between the two, other than it's more modern to use the local. Um, and also, as I just mentioned, you're then explicitly scoping. This changed a few versions ago, actually quite a bit. quite a bit ago. And yeah, I see both. If I'm being honest, I don't really like, given the choice between the two, obviously do local, mostly for your own sanity. Just for your own state of mind. When a bug comes up and you're reading your code, that's an additional little context switch that you need to do to figure out, like, oh, there's like, okay, var greeting, right? Like, what is that? Like, where is that coming from? Oh, well, okay, it's local. Cool. Versus like local dot message, like that is specifically being scoped into the local scope of that particular thing. Anyway, so that's that's my feelings. Maybe other people have other feelings, but it's not. This is not one of the things that will necessarily break your code. Um, in components or CFCs, so these are basically instance private states for CFCs. They're good for internal component stuff or helper methods, and they live for the life of the CFC instance, right? So, in some ways, you can think of it kind of like local lives for the life of the function. As long as the CFC is still running and live, it's going to continue to be there. Um, you have to be really careful though, when used inside of a method instead of local, because it can create like memory leaks and have unintended consequences on what your output ends up looking like. So be a little careful here. And then this dot scope. So this is for public component states, versus private, which is what variables was. This is for stuff that's exposed on the instance, right? So like when you're doing pseudo constructors, any like public properties, they're more visible, they're more accessible than variables. But but you have to be very careful because again, it's not really a I guess it's not really a global state, but you can pollute this scope pretty easily. Like, don't use it as a dumping ground for stuff. And again, because this lives a little bit outside, it actually has access to external stuff. Thread safety can be an issue here. You know, if you're not locking something down, which you know you're not going to really want to lock it anyway, but you have to be careful if like shared instances are involved, that one CFC is not writing over another one. So again, for most people, it's not a problem. To actually have thread safety come into being an issue, you got to be scaling something pretty high, right? Usually, the engine's pretty good at doing things fast, but 100% I've actually seen this break in one of my in one of my early applications that I wrote. All right, so request scope. This one's fun. This one lives for the request only, right? So when you go out and you grab a template, that's a request. You're requesting something from the server, and it's actually really useful if you're running. Let's say you're running a few different functions during the same request, like you're building a page out and you want to set a variable based on something. Maybe you're creating something, maybe you're pulling something in from a query and then building a string, whatever that happens to be. And that's going to be used in multiple places during that request, during that page load. This is a really great place for data to be held while the request is happening across functions. It's very useful. Things like it's kind of like a pseudo cache, and you know, contextually it works really well. It avoids recomputing stuff, right? Like instead of basically having to re-get some data that's expensive and rebuild something for every time a new function is being used to write stuff to the page, you can do it once and reuse it. However, it's not shared across different users, right? And it's not shared across different requests. Once the request dies, the request scope variables die with it. So there you go. I use request a lot. I actually use request sometimes too often, and then once I have something working, I try to lock it down a little bit more. For me, it's a really good like POC type of thing where I'm pretty sure I know how long it's going to live, and I'm pretty sure I know what the value is going to be. And then from there, I re-architect it potentially to lock it down and make sure that my performance doesn't go down, etc. All right, the shared scopes. These are fun. So session is used a lot, right? Session lives across multiple requests. Sessions have to be turned on. You would do that generally speaking in application.cfc, and you can give them a time to live. Often, probably one of the most common things that sessions are used for is when you authenticate, to hold the fact that this person is authenticated, and potentially maybe some of their maybe their username, so you can display and say hello Mark Takata or whatever you're going to do. um, and they can live for a while. You have to be careful though. There's some gotchas with sessions that happen. One being, if you leave the page and the session expires on the server, and then you go and hit the page, that session is no longer there. And something that a lot of people try is, there's in application.cfc, there's things like on session start, on session end. Well, the issue is a lot of people will try to refresh a session on session end, and it doesn't work that way. When the session ends, it's dead. There is no, oh wait, hold on, like you're trying to run after a cab. The cab left already. So uh, kind of be careful about that. Make sure that you're programming defensively if using session, because the point of a session is for it to expire at some point, right? Application. That one, that one's interesting. I've seen application used in a few weird ways before. Um, like, often I've seen application used for things that you don't want to go get again, or you don't want to set again. Things that are universal to that application. Here's the gotcha here though. Once an application starts, its time to live is the life of the application. What does that mean? Well, if you don't reboot your server and you don't do application stop, that application might just keep running. Um, and so if you're setting variables in it, this happens a lot when you're actually building out an application for the first time. You're coding. You're like, hey, I know. I'll throw it in the application scope. Cool, no problem. If you throw that in there and then go, oh wait, no, it's different. Oh, it needs to be this. Hey, why isn't it showing up? Well, because it's never on application start is probably where you're putting it. That application has already started. It's already there. You have to explicitly set the application variable to be the thing. And I'm sorry, I'm mixing some of the different life um, workflows inside of application.cfc. But this is where this stuff lives, and it happens a lot that people get confused about when things start, when things end, and where to put things. One thing that you can do is to put an application stop into your application.cfc on application start. I know. Um, Only when you're developing. Please don't do that in production, because it's an anti-pattern, right? Like, you don't want to restart the application scope every single time. That's not what you want to do. Server scope. Okay. Big warning. Use sparingly. Incredibly important that you do not overuse server scope. This thing lives for everyone on the server. Your application, all the other applications, it doesn't matter. That thing lives everywhere. Now, I have seen this misused. There was I'm not going to name any names, but there was an educational facility that used to put in a lot of student record data into their server scope. Oh boy. Very, very, very bad thing. This, the information was huge. It took up huge swaths of memory. It never went away until the server had to be restarted, and then they had to actually go and rebuild that server scope data. It was very, very non-performant. Let's just put it that way. So be really super, super careful about what you put into the server. Honestly, I can't remember the last time when I actually used the server scope in a production application. So these require discipline. These require architectural thinking. These require making sure you're understanding who can access them and how long they live. Um, and if you're doing a chained read mod write into any of these, you may want to lock them for that particular um, workflow, because this absolutely can have race conditions happening, and your application doesn't even need to be that scaled. If someone else's application is getting hit pretty hard and they're using one of these shared states like server or application, um, and they didn't name their application also, like, that's another thing that can happen. Like, you could get a an overwrite on stuff. Even sessions I've seen get overwritten. So yeah, just be careful. Input environment scopes. These are the scopes that a lot of people never scoped in the past. And I've seen a few interesting little, I don't know if I want to call them hacky, but kind of hacky things. Like, for example, if you ever wanted to get input from a form, but you were maybe like using an error handling thing that would send you back to the previous page or whatever, and you could put in a value into the URL to pre-populate stuff. Well, so theoretically, that could be coming from the URL, it could be coming from the form scope, right? In the past, you could just put the variable name, and ColdFusion would implicitly traverse and find the first instance of an existing variable inside of that scope and drop it in. That no longer works. And also, it's not readable. Like, it's not for me, the maintenance of something like that, you do it once or twice, that's fine. You do it a few 100,000 times, um, yeah, it gets really, really bad. Um, oh, so I've got a few comments. Hold on, just let's see. Troy Jameson says, I find it useful semantically in that we use the request scope, that it is proof positive the variables declared upstream. Yes, yes, exactly that. And that's actually a really good trick too. Like, using the lifetime, the time to live of the scopes can be a good way to figure out where variables like are instantiated and where they're being set. So that's a really good point, Troy. And then Rich says, speaking of that, is using var for local scope variables safe considering the search implicit scopes being removed, i.e., search implicit scopes equals true? Oh, you mean if? Sorry, Rich. Do you mean, is it safe if you have search implicit scopes on? It's fine, but if it's turned off, um, yes, it is, and it's fine because inside of a function there is there is still an implicit search that's done inside of a function for local. The moment it doesn't find it there, it crashes. It will not traverse further, but it does do it inside. It does that inside of closures as well. Um, but again, you really, again, like, you really want to explicitly set them, just for that reason. I'll actually show you an anti-pattern later that breaks inside of a closure if you don't explicitly set things. um, so, okay, so we've got URL, we've got form, and those are pretty self-explanatory, right? Like, you've got, your URL question mark, name is equal to Mark Takata, right? That's a URL variable. A form is just you submitted a form to a page that's in the form scope. CGI. CGI has a lot of metadata that's coming across, right? And this one, I think we used to use this a lot to try and figure out like where a request was coming from, like people's IPs and things like that. These days, I feel like that data is much harder to trust. um, there's a lot of proxy happening. It's really hard. Like, if someone's behind F5, like, or some other server balancer, it's really hard to get stuff to drill through. So I actually don't use CGI very much anymore. Cookies. So cookies are a way that you can hold information data that will live for the lifetime of the cookie. I tend not to use these. They're a little bit insecure. Not terribly, but I find that it's one step further than my brain likes to work. Tons of people use them, though. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them. Just be careful. You got to treat every input that's coming in. Maybe with maybe CGI is not so bad, but make sure you treat it as untrusted until you sanitize it. It's just a good idea, especially when you're doing like database writes, right? Um, and by the way, a little hack for performance: if you are not um, if you are not actually doing parameterization of your inputs when you're going into a database, do it. Not just for safety and security and SQL injection protection, but even if it's something that you're creating locally or that you trust explicitly, still parameterize it if you're using SQL Server, because SQL Server has a really massive performance increase if you parameterize all the variables that are going into it. This doesn't matter if you're doing a stored procedure, though. So your mileage may vary. Um, And so what, like, outside of this being required, if you don't have if you don't have search implicit scopes true tag, why should you do it? Well, it improves security, review readability. It's just better for 6 months from now or a year from now when you're looking at your code and you're trying to figure out what the heck is wrong, why something's breaking. You can just tell, like, oh, yeah. And the potential exists, by the way, that at some point we will finally be forced by our security teams to remove the argument to allow implicit scopes. There's no current plans for it. It's not on the board yet. But if I were you, I would make sure all of my stuff is scoped. There's ways to test. There's ways to figure out which variables are unscoped inside of your code. Pete Freitag's software suite has an amazing, like the Foundio software has an amazing tool that allows you to do that. Please do that. So why does all this matter, right? Well, as I said, you used to be able to resolve stuff, but these days we disable it kind of out of the box by default. You can turn it back on, but The real reason is that when you start to get into things like closures, which we'll talk about in a second, it's really easy to make accidental assignments. And what can happen then is that you're modifying a broader state than you meant to. And that can cause really, really hard to pin down bugs. Like things that don't necessarily break, but you're getting numbers and values that make absolutely no sense. And then you're trying to track them down and you're like, what is going on? And you're potentially using a closure somewhere away from the actual usage of what's happening. So it's just a good idea. It improves your security as well. It's just good to know. So, all right, fun time. What's a closure? How many people does everyone here know what a closure is? Share, like hands up. How many folks know what closures are? Not getting a lot of folks saying yes. Okay, so this is good. Okay, I've got a couple. We got a few. Okay, so a few of you don't. A few of you don't. That's okay, Craig. You know what, Craig? Don't worry about it. I like for a very long time in my development life, I did not know what a closure was. And I'm going to tell a real quick story here. This was, oh my goodness, 15 years ago, maybe more than that. I interviewed for a job at a place that I was going to go do JavaScript for them. And they, had me doing a whiteboard interview, one of my least favorite things on the planet. I think I'd rather eat a bucket of nails than have another whiteboard interview. But basically, I had to write on my whiteboard the code, and they were going to type it into their console and then run it at the end and then see what happens, right? So these guys started telling me that I had a number and then I had to have it, you know, add another number and it had to happen in this amount of time. Well, of course, I didn't really understand at the time what a closure was. And when I did the set timeout, yeah, you already know. Um, when I did set timeout, that created a closure and my values were not changing because I was not accessing the correct variables. And so I learned real hard, like the hard way there, inside of a very, very awkward and embarrassing interview, what a closure was. But I mean, at that point, I'd been programming for 15 years. I just didn't understand what they were. So here's what they are. A closure is a function that remembers variables from the scope where it was created, even after that outer scope is finished running. It's kind of a function inside of another function. The inner function can use variables from the outer function, and that's where things maybe potentially go wild. If you return that inner function, call it later, still remembers those variables. They're used a lot with like array and struct operations, callbacks especially, and functional programming. And like I said, they can reference variables from surrounding scopes. So what does that mean? So closures can accept parameters like normal functions, and they can return values. They can be assigned to variables. They can be passed into APIs and functions. Um, so yeah, it's a kind of a weird thing, and I wish I could actually show you this running. There's a really weird bug in my version of on CF Fiddle. I was actually trying to do this in CF Fiddle so I could show you, and amusingly enough, there's a CFC, um, what do they call that? It's something is wrong with the CFC cache on my instance of CF Fiddle. I have no idea why. It's actually I have the team looking at it, but they have to like basically kill my instance and restart it. It's a pain in the butt. Um, but so here you go. So what's a common closure bug? If you're missing local, it can change behavior dramatically. So you've got two different things here. On the left is an ambiguous assignment. On the right is a non-ambiguous assignment. It's an explicit assignment. Now, those two things potentially could return different things if count was coming from somewhere else, right? So if this was inside of another function or was passed into it some other way, it's not local. So you have to be really, really careful. And the problem with closures is that they can amplify the confusion because they actually delay execution. You call them later. And so when you're doing callbacks like this, please scope your assignments. I mean, you should just be scoping everywhere. Like the easiest thing is just to scope everywhere, to be quite honest. Um, so anti-patterns to watch for. So what are some of the things that you want to avoid when doing stuff? So unscoped assignments and CFC methods. Even if you have the thing set, even if it's inside of a closure, even if it's inside of anything where it actually works, just scope them. Um, be especially careful with closures that mutate application or session or even server, right? Why? Well, because they can be called by other functions, they sort of delay execution and they can be set somewhere not obvious inside of your code. It's a little bit of a black box when you're actually trying to figure out why something is setting something else that you didn't mean to do. So if you're mutating application or session or server, any of those types of shared environments, make sure, well, A, that you're doing it explicitly and you're making like that you really need to do that. You're not just using it because it's an easy scope to access, that you actually mean to do that. And make sure that you're somehow logging that or otherwise knowing that you're actually doing it. Um, Mixing the use of like vard, unscoped variables, and local in the same function. I mean, can you do it? Sure. Do you want to do it? No, it's going to drive you crazy a year from now when you're looking through it and you're trying to figure out why something's getting set one place and not another, and it's not working correctly in some cases. Um, any callback logic that depends on an ambient state with no reference. Again, this is this is like an unscoped thing that just lives inside of it all the time. Like, don't do that. And reusing broad scopes for temporary values just because it works. So this is a thing I need to learn, by the way. Me, the guy doing this talk, actually does this, and I need to slap my wrist and stop doing it, because it's really easy to forget that you're doing that when building out your proof of concept stuff, your demos. It's super easy to use request or session or whatever, right? Because hey, it worked, cool, no problem. Yeah, until you need it somewhere else, or you need that variable to live longer than the request, and suddenly you go back and go, oh my gosh, I need to change 50, 100 instances of it because this is no longer going to work. Like, architect it out, figure it out, and use the right scope. Um, okay, so this is the cheat card for which scopes should be used where. And it's a good one. So local inside of function invocations, it's the safest default. Arguments, they only exist when they're input into a function, when you're invocating it, when you're instantiating it. Variables, those are for component page instance states, usually for private helper functions, things like that. This, same except for public component states. Requests, they live for one HTTP request only. They're useful for utilization across shared functions inside of that request only, right? And this, believe it or not, it happens a lot. There's a reason why I use request, because it's very, very useful. But make sure you need it before using it. Session, one user across requests, lives for the lifetime of the session. Time to live is usually set inside of application.cfc. Remember, it will time out and die. You do need to turn on sessions usually for you to be able to use sessions. I'm not saying it's an anti-pattern to use sessions. I'm saying be careful using them because they will time out and then potentially you could have a crash. So program defensively. and then URL form, cookie, CGI, and client. Incoming data, context, dangerous, 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 dangerous. Validate and sanitize anything coming in from outside prior to using it anywhere inside of your code. Things can go horribly, horribly wrong with those. So before I get into Q&A and contact, I did just want to show all of you guys. So I built this out. This is a fun little thing. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, you're seeing it. This is a fun little thing that I built out. This is going to be on my GitHub, inside of the ColdFusion, Foundation series, um, inside of the scopes and closures library. And this just kind of goes through and talks about a lot of the things that I've said already. And we've got like a lot of live outputs. We've got the docs where you can go and read up on the usage. We've got some sample stuff. We have it in some of this is in tags, some of it is in CFScript. So I usually say if you're doing any sort of functional or logic stuff, I prefer CFScript to do that. If you're doing stuff where you're outputting it, I think tags are fine. So your mileage may vary. But I've got something from Troy. So Troy says one scope that I haven't seen mentioned is this tag scope for custom tags. Yes, that's a really good point. We've recently discovered it can be used to make custom tag invocations unique. Yeah, that's actually a really, sorry I didn't mention that. Like this tag it's a little esoteric. Like not everyone uses custom tags anymore. They used to be used much more than currently. But yes, that is a scope that is only it is only inside of the custom tag. I actually have that here. So there you go. So here's so this code here actually does talk about it, Troy. I just didn't mention it because generally speaking, it's not used um, in my in my experience these days. We used to use it way more, but I guess like now that we've lost that like library thing, like I know Raymond used to have a really great custom tag library. I think it's used a little less, but I'd love to see them used more. I'd love to see actually community folks building custom tags and having some reuse. That would be really great. All right. So there you go. Here is my contact information. You all can email me at takata@adobe.com if you have questions beyond today's talk. I'm on the CFML Slack. Definitely come into CFML Slack if you're not there. Oh, GitHub location. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ripley. Let me update that. Sorry, one second. It's gotta remember where I put it. GitHub. Here it is. Boop. Okay, so it's github.com/marktakata/webinars. And there will be a I haven't uploaded it yet, but there will be a folder there with CF Foundations, and it'll have the scopes and closures in there. So there you go. So yeah, that's scopes and closures. And I know I didn't get into closures as deeply as maybe some folks would want me to. I realized that there's a depth to them that really would necessitate an entire like 1 hour talk. And so later on, once I'm done with the CF Foundation series, I do plan on doing like a CF Mastery series, and closures will be one of those things that I'll cover in that. So look for that probably late this year, maybe after summer. I should be able to start doing those. Schedule it. Well, I still got lots and lots of other stuff to do. We're about to drop, by the way, the new update for ColdFusion is coming really, really soon. And along with that, hopefully um, you're all signed up for CF Summit. CF Summit is happening in June this year. It's late June, and a lot of really cool stuff is being released. By that point, you'll be able to get the new update for CF. It's not going to be CF26, by the way, just so that's not confusing. It's going to be a function update, a feature update called CF 2025.1, and it includes a ton of new AI features. In support of that, at the summit, we're actually doing a workshop that you can sign up. Has all of our engineers teaching a full 1-day class on how to utilize all the AI features that we're dropping in. And this is not CFHTTP hitting an API, folks. This is using LLMs locally, using vector stores locally, using MVC, not MVC. Uh, oh my gosh, MCP. MCP locally. It's really, really, really good stuff. You don't want to miss it. Don't get FOMO. You should sign up. It's in Las Vegas. Yeah, we're at the Bellagio this year. Definitely check it out. Great patching again. I'm not sure what you mean, Ripley. It's not so much a patch. It's so that you don't have to install a brand new server. Yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like it's more than a patch though. This is a full feature release. So what you're going to see, the way that it works is kind of cool. What'll happen is when you update it, it's going to add the ability to include the new AI features inside of your modules. So you'll just be able to go in and choose which things you want to use and add those instead of, what normally happens if you have like CF20, 26, 27, whatever, like a full feature or a full engine update. Those full engine updates require you to, pretty much like get rid of your old engine, install the new stuff, reset it up, all that. Like this is just adding new capability. And this is what we were talking about when we went to subscription models. It gives us the ability to just do this stuff like in situ, right? You already have everything set up, it's already running. We're just adding new tooling that you can add as you need it. So if you want to run MCP servers, you can add that. If you want to do direct LLMs, you can add that. And if you're not going to be using any of that stuff, then you don't need to. And there's other language changes that are coming as well, other quality of life things that are coming. But the big news is really the AI. So yeah, it'll hopefully, fingers crossed, save a lot of you a lot of headaches and make your update really, really easy. By the way, I've been using the new way of doing this, and the tooling was so simple. Like I almost didn't realize that it had like done the job. I just was like, okay, like I have to point because it's a beta product. I have to point it at a new update location. And then, oh, cool, new updates, install, done. And they just worked, right? There was like no bugginess, no instability, nothing. Because we're not like ripping out the Tomcat from underneath it. We're not ripping out any of the new like Java, the JDK or anything like that. It's just new cool stuff to use. So anyhow, thank you for coming. If there's no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. I want to thank you all for coming. Hopefully this wasn't too technical as a foundation series thing, but I've enjoyed giving this talk to all of you, and hopefully I'll see you at my next talk. That should get scheduled here pretty soon. You'll see it on my LinkedIn. So go ahead and please follow me on there to see it. And awesome. Yeah, you're very, 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 very welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.